Yesterday, in the brilliant fall colors and the dazzling warm light of Los Altos, we buried my friend Jim McKnight in the columbarium of our old church. Jim and I had a strange relationship. He is my parents' age, and we met when he was about 60. He was full of wisdom and life at that time, and yet he'd only been ordained a few months, and so he didn't know as much as I did about running churches. For 10 years, he was my assistant rector, and I don't know if I'll ever work as closely with another human being again. And we accomplished some extraordinary and surprising things together. He had a wry sense of humor. He loved opera. He was incredibly orderly, detail-oriented, faithful, humble. He was kind and thoughtful. He was also kind of tense. He was a little bit high-strung. We were like the odd couple. He was like the Felix Unger, and I was the Oscar Madison. He would have joked that he was a little neurotic, but he wasn't. And I still carry so much advice in my head from him. One of the things he always would say is, trust the process. And I find myself hearing that voice in my head quite often. Now we were in the columbarium, so there are gates out into the garden. It was on the undercroft of the church. And everybody who was gathered at that service, everyone there I'd known for 20 years. And after saying some words about Jim, I turned to Claire, the new rector, and I tried to thank her for taking care of the people that I loved so much. And as I turned to look at her, I saw all the names on the columbarium wall of the people who I'd known and I loved. And I just started crying. I wasn't even able to say the blessing. I couldn't collect myself. There was Jennifer, a 40-year-old opera singer. I visited her every single week for the whole year before she died of ALS. There was a 19-year-old girl who died of a drug overdose when she went away to college, but had been faithful in our youth group. There was a few adversaries too, people who didn't believe in the school that we were starting and who definitely let me know about it. There was a 100-year-old man named Bob, and as soon as I mentioned his name, another one of us said, yeah, he was the person who had the strongest handshake of anyone in the church. And there was Howard, who spent his last day looking at, basically giving me pointers as I planted a plum tree in the garden. He went home to his house, took a nap that afternoon, and just slipped peacefully into death. There were so many colleagues and friends there, and we'd done so many amazing things, from housing homeless people to visiting the VA hospital to all the different local small town ministries that we did. I had been with many of the people whose names were on that wall on the day that they had died. Every year, Grace Cathedral makes this extraordinary offering, this sung Requiem for all souls. And I think that many of us will experience some of the same feelings I had yesterday at the columbarium. Perhaps we will remember a sense of horror in the face of a tragic and untimely death. Perhaps we'll feel a feeling of loneliness or sorrow as we miss people so much, people we thought we could never live without. But you also may feel a sense of joy in remembering people who you'd forgotten, who meant a great deal to you, and remembering the wonderful idiosyncrasies that make every human life unique and a blessing to us. At this point, I want to thank especially Ben Bachman and Chris Keaty and our choir and our orchestra. We're so grateful to you. You're going to help us heal today in a way that nothing else could. And I'm very thankful for the music that you're giving to us today. In today's gospel, Jesus is talking to the big crowds at first, and then he's talking to a small group of his closest friends. And then after that, he's really talking to us. In a way, the audience of these speeches are not so much the disciples as they are the people of the time when Mark wrote this gospel. Mark wrote the gospel at a time of tremendous turmoil and suffering and sadness and bitterness in the history of the Jewish people. Not long ago, I memorized Psalm 84, and it's the psalm that we say in the vestry every day before we come in and pray together. And I wanted to know the whole thing by heart, and so I memorized it. Here's how it begins. How dear to me is your dwelling, O Lord of hosts. My soul has a desire and longing for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh rejoice in the living God. And really, the whole thing, it's just a love song to the temple in Jerusalem that was the heart of the Jewish faith for centuries. And the sadness and the love is so deep in that psalm. And for me, over this time of memorizing, it's become a kind of love song for me, for Grace Cathedral, for all of you, for these moments when we're together like this. It brings me such joy. King Herod the Great was the one who built the great temple. He began working on it in the year 20 BC. And even in Jesus' time, so 50 years later, it was not completed. And so you can imagine Jesus' disciples coming to him and saying, what big stones. And they were indeed. They were 35-foot long stones. They were 12 feet high. They were 18 feet long. They were massive, massive stones in the foundation. And yet Jesus warned them that one day that they would be overturned. And after they completed the great temple, only 7 years later, there was an uprising in Jerusalem and in the Holy Land, and the Roman government, the soldiers of the Roman government came and they crushed the rebellion, and they absolutely destroyed the heart and soul of the identity of the Jewish people. So that's what this is about. Terrible loss. And Jesus has 3 words of advice for these people who are experiencing this terrible loss. The first is that Jesus warns us to beware of worshiping the wrong things, not worshiping money or status or power or the sense of approval that we might feel from other people. We can love those things in a way that lead us away from God. The second thing Jesus teaches us, he invites us to regard whatever is troubling us in a new light. Jesus invites us, whether we're mourning or in pain or in suffering or just disoriented from coming out of COVID, and Jesus promises us that this might be a kind of birth pang, that something extraordinary and new may be on the way, and this is the way we begin to sense that. On Friday, Heidi and I took our dear friend Rita Semmel, many of you know her and love her too, and we took her out to lunch for her 100th birthday. 100 years. And I asked her, I said, well, what advice do you have to bring back to all the people who love you so much at Grace Cathedral? And she said, I don't really have anything to say. But then she thought of something different. And she said, listen, I want to tell you about this. She said, I think that at the heart of all true religions is this idea, tikkun olam. In Hebrew, it means the repair of the world. She said there's an idea like that in every single religion. The repair of the world, the kingdom of God, the realm of God, the beloved community. Finally, the last thing that Jesus teaches us is to keep awake. The world has such great beauty. I mean, among that, the music that we're hearing today can move our souls, but we have to listen to it in order to be able to hear. There are so many signs of wonder all around us. As Mark was sensing the cathedral, the light through the stained glass window is going through the smoke, and it was absolutely beautiful. It was extraordinary, and if I hadn't been paying attention, I wouldn't have seen it. There's so many signs of hope if we will let ourselves receive God's grace and see things as they are. The 19th century writer Henry David Thoreau describes himself primarily as a chanticleer. That's the rooster that wakes us up in the morning. In his book Walden, before that famous passage where he talks about going to the woods to live deliberately, I don't know if you remember that, but he writes these words that may be even more important. To be awake is to be alive. I have never yet met a man who was fully awake. How could I have looked him in the face? Yesterday in the Christ Church columbarium, I suddenly became more awake. In that instant, I saw more fully the connections that bind me with people who I love so much. Together, we had set out to repair the world. And although there's still so much work to do, we succeeded to a remarkable extent. We succeeded beyond our expectations. For an instant, I realized that God, through Christ, is bringing all things to completion.